I think that's the biggest mistake that I've made is having a goal. And of course, it was a physical goal, so I tried to attract it in a physical manner.
Right.
I would just work harder and take more risks and all of that kind of stuff. And I noticed over the years that when I set a goal like that, I got part of it, but not enough to satisfy me.
Right.
It was enough to say, well, I set this goal and the ladder was 10 feet high and I got up at 8 feet or something like that.
It was enough to satisfy the letter of the law, but not the spirit.
Right.
Right.
Right. And for those of you in our audience, if you'd like and subscribe, we'd appreciate it.
Yes, we would. Very much so.
The groups going down, his first groups were about the size of a silver dollar, and his second groups were about the size of a quarter, and the third groups were down about the size of a dime, and then he ended up with 4 or 5 groups there that he shot. I think they were at 35 pounds, and they were just one ragged hole smaller than your fingernail.
Nice.
With just, it wasn't expensive ammo.
Right, and it wasn't expensive ammo, he wasn't adjusting his sights, and he was just adjusting the torque on the action.
Right, yeah, just torquing those screws.
The screw on the...
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, I would love to really get precise with my new rifle. That would be really fun. That would be a lot of fun. I think that would be very cool.
Yeah.
So, awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to doing that. So one of the reasons why I asked you last night to come by today was, since we have a book club for Neville Goddard's books and presentations, I thought it'd be a good time to start it since we don't record our book clubs. Figured we may as well record ours, and then with the other guests we can discuss them in our book club.
Yeah, I think the first thing we need to talk about is why we want a book club and the advantages that we think we would get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is the reason for a book club, is that you gain some kind of advantage out of it. And you're not only reading the book, which gives you a personal interpretation, but you're listening to other people and listening to their interpretations. And sometimes their interpretation makes more sense than what yours did.
Right, because we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are.
Right.
And our understanding, what we get out of something is equal to our openness and understanding. That's already there.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and it's in equal proportions to the amount we put into it.
Right. Well, and it's also, for one, part of it is the messenger and also the delivery of the message. But even when something's strictly factual and neutral, as much as something can be, what I found with communication and trying to teach someone something new, and this is substantiated by all of the literature I've read or heard on it, is to teach someone something, it has to be just beyond their understanding, but it can't be too far.
Right.
It has to be a mix. I don't know what that mix is of things that they know and make sense, along with new information that is corroborated by the information they already know.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I've seen with a lot of conspiracy theory, fake news stuff, is where someone will say something about a global conspiracy and then say, and as a Christian, I know this runs against my morals. Or I've seen it with Muslims too. I've seen a lot of Muslim content. I follow a lot of it where it's like, oh, this is proof that shaitan is in the world, and I as a devout Muslim, inshallah, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, and then they'll go off with a litany of just falsehoods that are objectively false on their face, But if you already get a bunch of people agreeing with you, oh, like this is a good, devout person along the lines that I am, who believes along the ways
Sure.
I am, and then I get some new information, you can teach people complete lies and make them believe lies the same exact way.
Oh, yeah.
And that's one of the things that's nice about being in a group of intellectually honest people who are having a good faith discussion, is that those echo chambers and descent down rabbit holes of falsehoods tends to not occur.
Right, right. And I think that our book club, like all book clubs, in a relatively short order, 2 or 3 meetings. I mean, we're going to meet once a week, and after 2 or 3 meetings, there's going to be people who show up all the time because they're getting value out of it, and other people who initially showed up who won't show up anymore because we're talking about stuff that they can't accept.
Right.
And they can't even talk about it.
Right, and sometimes that lasts a lifetime, and sometimes it takes until they have some sort of life-changing experience. You know, I remember the first time I picked up Think and Grow Rich, I was 14, and I had a lot of people encourage me to read it, and I didn't read it until I was in my early 20s.
Right.
I tried a few times, couldn't get past the second chapter.
Right.
But then once I did read it in my early 20s, it made sense. It was like, oh, and I just devoured it twice. Mm-hmm. And that's sometimes just the way it goes.
Right.
And that's fine. You know, it's a lot of things, just like with my stutter, where I catch myself going, oh, you know, if only I had been more dedicated, or I had been more this or more that, you know, I could have solved all these problems so much sooner. But it's like, no, there was... God's timing is perfect. And my life has been perfect in all of its imperfections, quote unquote.
Right.
And the education I've gotten from being stubborn, from being unwilling to change or being afraid of change, all of those things, those were all just part of the process. They weren't bad. And to try to guilt or shame myself or someone else for slow progress, you know, it's that quote I've been hearing, slow motion is better than no motion.
Right.
And some processes just take different times for different people. And that's just perfectly fine. And that's what's fun about the book club, is we get to support and encourage each other no matter where we are. And we're all different and think differently. And we're differently aligned, but we're close enough to where we can cooperate.
Yeah, I think that one of the most important understandings that I came across in my journey through life was that, except for the path that I came, I couldn't be where I am right now.
Right.
You know, if like with your and my relationship, if it wasn't for me having a crazy friend and you having 2 crazy friends who were crazy together, we wouldn't have met.
Right.
And one of the first things we started to do was make fun of our crazy friends.
And I don't know if we did it first or if they did it first, but I'm sure they were making fun of us too.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
You know, can you believe just how astray those guys are?
Oh yeah, a bunch of heathens.
Oh man, bunch of crazy heathens. And plus with the age gap, that was one of the funny things too, is because, you know, when we met, I was 19 and you were like 61, 62.
Yeah, I think I might have been 65 or so.
Yeah. Well, this would have been 13 years ago, so you would have been early 60s.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, it's not like we attended any of the same institutions. We just crossed paths.
Right.
And that's just how that happened. And there is just no other way any of that could have occurred. And then all of the ways that, you know, you met your crazy friend and the way I met my crazy friends, there's no way any of it could have been planned by us.
Right.
And it's just been a really, really good relationship, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. One of the reasons why you stood out to me immediately was because you were interested in learning. You were interested in learning carpentry. You were interested in learning about greenhouses and the solar aspects of the greenhouse that we were building. And you were really interested in life. I mean, you were just getting to the point where, you knew you had to get out of your mother's house just because of your age, not because of anything that your mother was doing or anything, but just because of your age. And I remembered when I was that age too, and how much other people had helped me, and that's why I decided that you'd be a good candidate for me to help you.
Yeah, it was because of you that I realized, I think it was early 20s, 23, that the reason we call it Pay It Forward is for all of the usual reasons, but for me, I believe the main reason is because there are just some people we could never pay back.
Right.
And uh, psychologists have found that the number one desire shared by the most people is a sense of contribution and appreciation.
Right.
And I think one of the things that destroys people who have, kind of like child stars and actors and, people who skyrocketed to fame, if they feel they're, for good or bad reasons, if they feel undeserving of all of the appreciation, they don't feel good enough, not because they're not good enough, quote unquote. It's because they feel they've gotten too much appreciation for too little contribution. Right. And when we don't feel that we've gotten enough appreciation for our contribution, that also makes us withdraw, either from relationships or institutions or organizations or our employer, our work.
Sure.
And to fulfill that obligation of contribution and reciprocity, they found that's one of the defining factors in a society is we have a sense of reciprocity. And we have a strong urge towards that, and if we can't fulfill that towards a person who has done us a good turn, we have to find some way to do that. And it's not just vapid and empty when people say, I've gotten so much from other people or from this country or from my church or from my work. I just wanted to find a way to give back. I'm sure for some that is just a fluff piece to say, but I know there are other people who mean it sincerely because I've been able to sincerely express that sentiment as well.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a really powerful and wonderful thing to experience is to be able to contribute and also get appreciation for it.
Right.
It's a really
right. Well, and that's, the main reason that I'm involved in these podcasts with you is trying to share this information with other people. And who knows, either one of us might say something in a way that somebody in the audience has never thought about it before. And all of a sudden they go, wait a minute, is that right? And then they start questioning, and then pretty soon they realize that, this particular piece of information that we had, that they would agree to it, and then where does that take them?
Right. And that's what I had recently with this Tony Robbins summit was when he talked about a woman who had chimed in and talked, and she stuttered and said, yeah, I'm sure some people think I'm crazy for being willing to talk in front of 50,000 people online because I stutter, but, this has been my experience. And he said, she spoke yesterday and Maria you need to check your messages because we reached out to you and we want to help you. And curing stuttering is one of the easiest things I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, wait, what?
Yeah.
Speaking to my good ear? Excuse me? And then that led me down a whole rabbit hole. And I'm sure I've heard him say that before. I've seen that YouTube of him helping a guy stop stuttering back when I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just different time, different place. Again, we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are.
Right.
And, you know, I think it was just a couple weeks ago that I'd called you after a meditation because I had an experience of, because I was imagining not stuttering, and I realized it was something to let go, and I became highly emotional around that. And afterwards I called you and I talked about it being like kind of a mourning, kind of a sense of loss.
Right.
And you had told me, well, a part of you is dying, so you're mourning that loss. And then, so to go through that, and then a couple weeks after that, to then be able to hear that and experience it, and then get more out of it and have the revelations and breakthroughs that I did, it was all part of the process.
Right.
And the whole process has been so fun in a wild way. I don't think I would have ever joined Toastmasters if I hadn't stuttered.
Right.
There would have been no reason for me to do because I was good enough.
Right.
I was fine. All my brothers and sisters are intelligent, well-spoken people.
Mm-hmm.
But none of them speak as well as I do.
Right.
None of them can present the way I do.
Right.
You know, and that's one of the funniest things is the fact that I was the kid who stuttered, the youngest of 5, and we're all good speakers because of the way we were reared and educated in our homeschooling. But I'm still the best speaker.
Right.
I'm still the best presenter.
Sure.
And it's all of that because of the process I went through.
Right.
And I'm really grateful for that, and it brings me a ton of joy that I had that opportunity to learn.
Yeah, and going through the process you did allowed you to practice in public speaking and get the rules or the rules of thumb of public speaking, and then whenever you stopped stuttering, everything enhanced. It brought about a whole change in your presentations and in the way you talk and do things. And it was just perfect for you for that to happen that way.
Right.
You know, it was, I'm sure it was frustrating whenever you were trying, but as soon as you quit trying,
Oh, man.
everything got in place. And that's why I'm curious about everything I will learn in studying Neville Goddard. I've been a fan of his for a year or so that I've been following him and Brian. What's Brian's last name? He has a YouTube channel. Can't think of it. Yeah, don't have it yet.
Sure, it'll come back.
Right. But I've been reading and studying him, and there's something about it that really attracts me to the point where I spend probably at least 2 hours a day listening to Neville Goddard's content. And I know there's all kinds of stuff in there that it would really benefit me to know. And you know, I'm chipping away at it, but I'm I'm absolutely serious about finding it out.
Right. And that was one of the things that was interesting to me when I forget if I first listened to a YouTube presentation from him or his book, or it may have been I got one of his books on Audible, and I was driving to St. Mary's, and so I had an hour, and listened to it at work, and it's so funny because what he says is just up the alley of Bruce Lipton, Joe Dispenza, Tony Robbins.
Right. Yeah, they're all talking about the same thing, just from a different perspective. Each one of them has a slightly different perspective.
Right. And one of the reasons why I think Goddard grabbed me so much was all of his examples and stories was, reading out of scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And his interpretation. And I think part of the reason why it grabbed me was because I enjoy the I enjoy the I enjoy finding the ethos and logos in the mythos.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy finding the rhyme and reason and the purpose in a myth.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the things when Christ would speak in scripture, he would use parables and tell a story. And he never said these stories are true and they happened entirely historically and factually. He said, you ask me a question, I'm going to tell you a story.
Right.
This is how you're going to understand this.
Right.
And growing up the way I did with all the different philosophies and mythologies that I would enjoy, from Greek to Nordic to Roman, which is a direct plagiarizing from Greek, which was a direct plagiarizing from Egypt. All of those, I enjoyed the cultural aspects of it. And the point of culture is to cultivate the culture. It's to instill ideas. It's to perpetuate good culture, just like a sourdough starter is maintained, and it is also a culture.
Right.
It's that type of deal. So when Goddard gets into using scripture and talking about Christ and using it that way, to me that makes perfect sense.
Right.
And I can enjoy it and get into the depths. And to me, it communicates very well to me. And it makes sense to me. To someone like my brothers, especially one of them, who just go, well, this makes no damn sense at all.
Right.
It just doesn't compute.
Yeah. Yeah, Brian Scott was the guy I was trying to think of.
Oh, Brian Scott on YouTube?
Yeah, on
Okay.
YouTube. And he has a lot of the same content, and he's had some successes in that arena. And who's the other guy? Elmer O. Locker Jr.
Elmer O. Locker Jr.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is another guy, and Elmer's first contact with this stuff was his grandfather went to one of Neville Goddard's presentations, and I think it might have been a presentation in New York. But anyway, he listened to it the first evening. It was probably a 2-hour lecture or so, and then Neville Goddard issued a challenge to them about saying that I'm not going to climb a ladder. And they were asked to come back the next week to find out if they actually did climb a ladder. And his point was, it doesn't make any difference whether you say you're not or you are. It's going to happen if you let it go like that. And Elmer's grandfather went and he was just going through the week and saying, yeah, I'm not going to climb a ladder. And he went to somebody's house and they were up on the roof doing something. And they said, hey, can you get me something? And he just climbed up the ladder. And then a little bit later, he goes, wait a minute. I said I wasn't going to climb a ladder, and now I've just completely forgotten about it. So that caused him to go back, and Elmer's grandfather he was a dance instructor, and Arthur Murray had the largest dance troupe or franchises.
Yeah, I'd heard about this story. Goddard did a presentation on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Elmer's grandfather was involved in that thing, and he just held the idea in mind of owning a Arthur Murray studio.
And they were expensive at the time.
Right, yeah, they were really spendy. And then he got a call from somebody that he knew from dance. I mean, he'd been out and been a competitive dancer and all that sort of stuff. So he knew a lot of the people that were playing that game. And he got a call, and the guy said, hey, you know, I know that you have business skills that I don't have, and I'd like to offer you a partnership, so to speak, in a Arthur Murray studio. So Elmer's grandfather did that, and then he was talking to the people, the other dance instructors that were involved in that thing, and he was telling them about Neville Goddard's ideas, and they said, well, you know, what can you do to prove that, you know, what he's saying is so? And he said, well, okay, here's a big goal. I want to, when we go to the yearly convention, I want our studio, which was one of the smallest ones, or the smallest one in the whole franchise thing, and they were all based on the number of people in the city, you know, so they were in a small town, I think Reno, Nevada.
Right.
And he said, you know, I'm going to put out the intention that we are the most famous dance studio at the yearly convention. Everybody will be talking about, you know, what we did and all of that kind of thing. And whenever they went to the convention, everybody did talk about it, including Arthur Murray. And he had put in his mind, Elmer's grandfather had put in his mind that he would have his own Arthur Murray studio in a big city. And a couple weeks after the convention, Arthur Murray called him and said, you know, do you want this franchise? And, you know, all the financing became available and that stuff. And Elmer's grandfather became a multimillionaire teaching people how to dance. You think, my God, if you can make $1 million doing that.
Before YouTube.
Right.
Right. Right. Then can also make millions of dollars cleaning windows.
Right. And Elmer, for some reason, was in prison. I forget what it was about. He scammed somebody or something, and he ended up with, I don't remember what it was. I think 6 years in prison, and he got out in 4 or something like that. But he got out because his grandfather sent him a copy of Neville Goddard's book, and he read it, and he said, you know, well, I don't like being in prison, so that's what I'm going to do. And it shortened up the amount of years that he had by quite a bit. Of course, whenever you're sitting in jail, one day is quite a bit.
Right. Well, that's one of those things when you have those experiences. Jim Rohn talked about it where, you know, when you finally get fed up, he talked about, you know, one guy at last got so sick and tired of being broke and feeling poor, and
Yeah, you just
he
got sick and tired of being sick and tired.
right, and he drove a piece of crap car that was always breaking down on him, but he had to drive it for work, and he at last just got so fed up with all the issues with the car and not being able to afford a better car that it was parked in the backyard. I'm pretty sure this was in eastern Idaho, and it was parked it in the back lot and took a 12 gauge shotgun to it full of buckshot and just filled the whole thing up. And he became successful. And Jim Rohn said when someone would say, Mr. Smith, how did you turn your life around and become so successful? Well, come back to my backyard. I'll show you my car.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This was the result of me making a decision.
Right, and I can well imagine where when you end up in a place you really don't want to be, like prison, that's where you then become open to whatever it takes. Mm-hmm. And I still have the journal entries from being broke, homeless, sleeping in my car. It was my birthday in a snowstorm in a Walmart parking lot, and my car's getting buried in snow, and I'd wake up every hour and a half just to warm it up. Then I'd have to wake up again to shut it off.
Right.
And it was just that realization that everything I had believed, which led me to everything I thought, which led me to everything I did, which led to every resulting outcome in my environment, brought me to here. Which means I can't nitpick what to retain and what to throw away. So I'm going to be open to throwing it all away and accepting new ideas that make it so that I don't end up here again.
Right.
And it was that highly emotional experience. Thankfully, it wasn't prison.
Right.
Thankfully, it wasn't getting a girl knocked up. Thankfully, it wasn't joining the armed forces, which I had considered.
Right.
All of those things.
Yeah.
And it was that allowed me to change my mind, was because I realized that everything up until that point had brought me to here, which means we aren't doing this again.
Right.
I just won't accept this.
Yeah.
I refuse. And that was important.
Right.
And so I resonate with this guy who ended up in prison. I'm just glad I didn't end up there.
Right.
I'm glad it didn't get that bad.
Right.
So I'm grateful for
that.
that.
No matter how bad it was, it could have been worse.
It could have been worse, yeah. It always could have been. So, cool. I think that was a great little rundown. Shall we get into the book a little bit?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. Well, we can always split this podcast up a little bit, turn into 2 parts, and then go into this.
Yeah. Is there something right in the first couple of pages that resonated with you or caused you to think about it maybe a little bit differently than what you had before?
Yeah. So this is the Neville Goddard Deluxe Collection, all 14 books. And this was the first book in years that I actually began to mark up. And, here it says, man's world in its every detail is his consciousness outpictured. You can no more change your environment or world by destroying things than you can your reflection by destroying the mirror. Your environment and all within it reflects that which you are in consciousness. As long as you continue to be that in consciousness, so long will you continue to outpicture it in your world. Knowing this, begin to revalue yourself. Man has placed too little value upon himself. And that was one of the things that sounds like that guy in prison and my own time in the car was our level of consciousness and our belief about ourselves. our reflection, and lashing out and doing stuff like that, trying to destroy things. It wasn't changing our reflection. But that concept of, like, Goddard goes into being a part of God, being the great I am, and the Christ being the imagination, which is where man becomes more than a natural creature.
Right.
And this ties in with something I had learned over a decade ago, which was the reason why classically Christ and other messiahs were associated with the cross. Some do it astrologically because the sun goes down near the vicinity of the Southern Cross around Christmas, and then 3 days of darkness, and it rises again and all that. But the cross symbolizes the intersection of God with the physical realm. And you die on the cross and you're resurrected on the cross and you're resurrected through the cross.
Right.
Where when your consciousness rises or descends,
right,
that's where you become more than a dog or less than a dog.
Right. Yeah, and to me, that whole thing relates back to whenever you set yourself a goal, I want this, a desire is coming out of you. I want this, I want to experience this event, or I want to experience having this item or this style of life or whatever it is that you want. And then just be thankful that it's coming. Not trying to push it. I think that's the biggest mistake that I've made, is having a goal. And of course, it was a physical goal, so I tried to attract it in a physical manner.
Right.
I would just work harder and take more risks and all of that kind of stuff. And I noticed over the years that when I set a goal like that, I got part of it, but not enough to satisfy me.
Right.
It was enough to say, well, I set this goal and the ladder was 10 feet high and I got up at 8 feet or something like that.
It was enough to satisfy the letter of the law, but not the spirit.
Right.
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 Right. Well, one of the things that I've been doing is not even being grateful for it coming. Like this morning when I was getting cleaned up in here and ready for our podcast, I visualized, because in here is where I visualize a lot of things and visualize my current goal that's at the forefront occurring and experiencing it. And just being in here triggers that, and I can see the physical things, and it elicited emotions in me of having that experience of what it'd be like here and now to have that here and now. Well, it feels this way. And I've done that enough to where it's automatic.
Right.
Where, it feels this way. And then I just become grateful for being able to experience the experience.
Right.
And that bringing it to the present right here and now. And it excites me because I have enough experience with it to know that the fact that I can experience it in advance before it actualizes is proof to me that I'm doing the right thing, that it will occur. Because if I am at the level of consciousness where I can think it, believe it, and experience here and now without force, without trying, that's when I know I'm on the right track. And then that makes me even more excited and grateful for having the experience right then and there, rather than just anticipation of fulfillment.
Right. And at some point in time, you will need to take action. However, the action will be so
Effortless.
obvious and effortless.
Right. It's like, here's where we're going.
Yeah, that it would go. One of Neville's stories was about a doctor and his wife who had a doctor's office and they lived in a house, someplace else, and they bought the commercial property beside them, beside the doctor's office. And they had it for years, and they had a lot of debt from the doctor's education and all of that sort of thing. And they just never got around to, focusing on building that thing. And they heard Neville speak, so the husband and wife decided, well, we'll just imagine that we have this apartment building, all here, that it comes perfectly, all that kind of stuff, and we'll just imagine that. And a couple of months later, there was a contractor who just happened to stop in, and he said to them, people come to me all the time wanting me to build business or build apartment buildings and that sort of thing. And they had recognized the name because they saw it all around town. But he said, I've noticed that you have this lot here beside you, and I looked and I see that you own it. Do you have an interest in putting an apartment building on it? And they said, oh yeah, we have an interest. We don't have any money. That's why we haven't done it. And he said, well, what do you think the first thing is that you need? And they said, well, we'd need to have a set of plans in order to be able to get permits and that kind of stuff, but we don't even have money for plans. And the guy said, well, let me see what I can do. The next day he calls back and he says, I have a set of plans in my office that I use for another building over here. You could go by it and take a look at it and that kind of stuff and see if you're interested in it. And so they did that. And yes, it was, well within the range of what they were looking for. And then they still didn't have money to do it, to build the building. And the contractor said, well, let me talk to the banker. And he went and talked to the banker, and he got them a loan for like 80% of the money that the contractor needed and that sort of stuff. And they said, well, we don't have the other 20%, and we're not going to go until we have it. As soon as we have the 20%, we'll do that. And a couple days later, the contractor come back and he said, there's something telling me that I need to build that building, so I'll lend you the other 20%.
Right.
And so the building goes up and everything, and then they had I think all but one of the apartments rented out. And the lady said, oh, we had all but one. And then she said, no, I remember imagining that we had them all rented out. And by the end of the day, a whole bunch of other stuff that just kind of happened came about. And they ended up with everything they wanted. And the action they had to take was to sign the contract. That was it.
Down, right. And also, I remember from that story, because one of the things that Neville's talked a lot about is imagine your good friends talking about you, and since they're good friends, they're happy for you and thrilled at your success.
Right, and they're talking to you.
And, well, yeah, and the last time I'd heard him talk about it, he said, they're talking about it amongst themselves, and you hear them, and then you come through the door and you appear, and they all start to talk to you and congratulate you on your success and how well you've done. And with that particular story about the apartment building and the contractor, what they had done was imagined going through the complex with their friends and showing them what they had done. Yeah. And they had even imagined one woman they knew was a sour grapes type of woman, and that she would sit down, that she would come by and sit down with them sometime and go, you know what, I always knew you two would accomplish this. Even though she was always the first one to say, oh, no, you don't have the money. You can't
Right.
do it. There's no way. And they had been in their own apartment for a month or so, and that woman came by for tea and
Right.
sat down and said, oh, I knew you would always accomplish this,
Right.
you know, despite the fact that she had always been saying, oh, you guys can't do that, you know,
Right.
the market and the rates right now, and no bank is going to loan to a broke doctor with student debts, you know, all this stuff,
Right.
and they had imagined that, and that was one of those things, and I can absolutely see that being a truly emotional event, because the more one can elicit emotion into a image in the mind, the more we get invested into it.
Mm-hmm.
So when they can get invested into even kind of maybe puerile, immature emotions such as I told you so,
Mm-hmm.
and having that experience and that pleasure of someone who always said, oh, you can't do this, go, oh, I always knew you would.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
Yep, you bet your butt.
Yep.
You know, that kind of, even that emotion of where it's very reptile-brained, but that's a very deep-level emotion of,
Oh, yeah. And
Told
the
you
day
so.
that your brothers and sisters come and tell you that they always knew you could make it.
right,
You want to
Right.
check the temperature outside because hell just froze over.
right, right. And that's one of the things that I realized, too, with speaking fluently and not having a stutter anymore, was the fact that especially my siblings would just go, well, duh, we always knew you would.
Right.
You know, it was just never a big deal. Well, it was for me.
Right.
Hello. And I got a sincere appreciation from a little bit ago saying, I'm the best speaker and presenter in my family.
Right.
And my mother's a wonderful presenter and speaker. And this is not a put down on her. This is saying, and for me, this is a commendation for what a great job she did homeschooling, was that to excel beyond even that. Because most people learn what they learn in high school and then they stop.
Mhm.
And that's just where they stay. And I know my mother's really thrilled about the fact that I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the best speaker and presenter among my siblings, and
Sure.
they never stuttered. So,
Sure. And you're off on your own, and you have you have enough wealth to really live in a high style. I don't know how many people your age, I would imagine it would be damn few that live in the United States and would be able to, tour around Europe and that stuff for 2 or 3 months a year and all of
Right.
that sort of thing.
live alone in such an expensive town.
Right, yeah.
Right. Well, and for me, that's not even really what I brag about. Like when I talk to my friends, you, Troy, my parents, other people in our book club and our breakfast club, when I talk about those things that I can do, I can tell when people think I'm bragging about material gain, and when they feel like I'm sharing my experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's been the big thing. For me, what's fun to talk about with these things that I do externally is just, for me, the result of work that I did internally.
Right.
And that's what I truly want to share and talk about. And that's what's nice with my close friends, is that they don't begrudge me my material successes, even if they feel I've done better than they have. They're excited about the fact of how far I've come,
Mm-hmm.
that then the result, that this is the result, this freedom is the result,
Right.
the financial freedom is the result. Even though I still feel like I'm way behind the 8 ball and there are some dumb things I've done and corrective action I'm taking, but it was like 1/3 of people aged between 20 and 34. So it's part of, so a lot of it is the younger generation, Gen Z, not my generation, not 90s babies per se, people who are now in their 30s. So that skews the stats a little bit, but it's like close to half is what I heard on the PBD podcast. Ages 20 to 34, 18 to 24, cannot pay their monthly bills without their parents' assistance.
Right. Forgot to put that one over there.
Well, at least I did my phone.
Right.
So we'll cut that out.
There we go.
There we go. And that's an unfortunate set of circumstances. So even with the mishaps and flubs I've made and errors in judgment, and where I've erred in judgment, I know I'm still doing better than average.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good.
Mm-hmm.
For now, that's been good, as long as I can stay ahead of the curve. Even if I'm behind my own personal 8-ball, I'm still ahead of the curve, and I'm good with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been keeping me striving and working ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I want to make sure that our audience would understand is that you can read a book like this and you may get a lot of stuff out of it. And if you do, put the book down whenever you finish it. Don't even look at it for a month or so, and then pick it up and reread it. And this time, whenever you read it, highlight anything that sticks out to you. And then put the book down for a month or so, pick it back up again, and only read those highlighted sections. And this time, if something sticks out to you in a different way, or maybe even more so in the way you first considered it, to use a straight edge and underline that particular sentence or particular paragraph, whatever it is. And then you can pick the book up at any point in time, and I have a bunch of books that are already marked up like that. And the week between Christmas and New Year's, I pull all of those books out and I read all the underlined
Oh, that's cool.
statutes. And what happens is the entire book, it brings the story before that passage and the story after that passage back into your mind, and you consider it in a different way because you're a different person. Even if it's only a year or 2 years later, you're a different person than read that book the first time.
Even if it's a different time of day or a different week, your emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
Was it early in the morning? Was it late in the evening? Was it after a really good, productive day?
Right.
That you then read it. Just that alone is being a different person.
Right. But studying the book rather than just read them, boy, you really need to get into studying them.
Right. Well, we had talked about this on a previous podcast about Bob Proctor and how a mentor of his gave him Think and Grow Rich and told him you need to study this book, and how Bob Proctor wound up with a book stand with it on his desk, and each day, once in a while, he'd go through it and
read the next page. Yeah.
Right. And after that, I was talking to Melissa about it, and she goes, well, before you go and buy a book stand, let me take a look at things, because she collects a lot of vintage antique stuff, and she said, I'm pretty sure I have a book stand. And I got a package from Amazon, and I thought, I don't have anything I'm expecting, and I opened it up, and it was this book stand.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a solid wood book stand, and I called. I thought about it. I said, "Did this come from my mother?" Check the account. It's not from her. And I thought, Amazon. That wasn't Cliff. And then I thought, oh, it has to be Melissa. So I texted her. I said, "Did you send me a book stand?" And she started laughing. And she said, "Well, because I have a book stand just like that. It just I realized it would actually be, it was cheaper and more convenient to just get it off of Amazon."
Right.
And I ordered a hardbound, larger size copy of Think and Grow Rich.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to have that there too.
Yeah, cool.
And I might do that with this book or Richest Man in Babylon or
Yeah, it doesn't
other
make any
books.
difference.
But as I go through them, I'm going to have that because I want to have this here and to be able to stand
right.
and do that and go through it and take it seriously.
Yeah, and I would suggest that our audience do that with any book that excites them, any book that, gave them a new perspective about something or another. And then study the book because, you got something good out of it the first time you read it. Chances are there's all kinds of other things in the book.
Right. Right. And with a book stand like that, and it's fun because it's a present, but with a book stand like that and buying a hardbound book, and it just kind of lends gravity to it because the way we approach the book, the way we read the book, the way we present the book to ourselves communicates to us that this is something important and something to focus on. And it was just like with the journals I have, I went from a spiral bound, college ruled textbook to Italian leather, hardbound, Amalfi paper, unlined ledger books, and writing in them with a gold nibbed fountain pen.
Right.
Where,
sure.
The book plus the pen, it's $1,000.
Right.
Just for the book and the pen, and again, it's not bragging about, oh, look at what I have. It's about, this is how seriously I take it, and this is the reverence I approach it when I sit down with my coffee in the morning and I sit and write in my best hand in my journal of where this is what it is. And it brings me so much joy because often when I write, I imagine my grandchild or great-grandchild or my great-grandchild's best friend finding my books, and there are just dozens of these books, and opening them up, and it's all in cursive on unlined paper and mostly straight and, signed and dated beginning, end time, and it's just all this stuff. If I had that from my grandfather or great-grandfather, it would be the one thing I would grab in a house fire.
Right.
Was go to the bookshelf and grab them and run out the door. That's how I would treasure them. And one of the ways I can show that I believe there's value in my journals is the fact that I buy personalized custom journals that I have shipped from Rome. Because I found this little shop next to the Pantheon in Rome that made handmade custom leather goods. And now I just order from them directly. And
yeah, sure.
It's just cool. Like, if I could tell that story about my grandfather or great-grandfather of, this is why he began buying these books. And these were the books he used before. And you can see the progression of his handwriting and his thinking and his thoughts and the value he put into what he was doing by the materials he used.
Right. And I think where the real advantage to the people reading this is going to be in the third and fourth generation of your legacy.
Right.
Your children, as much as you love them and you want them to be successful and you try to explain this kind of stuff to them, you're an adult explaining it to a child. They don't understand it in the same way you mean it. And they're going to be lost to you. But your grandchildren, and especially your great-grandchildren, because I would imagine that whenever you pass on, there's going to be millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that got to go somewhere.
Right.
And if they don't have an instruction booklet, it'll ruin their lives.
Right. Right. Well, that was one of the things in the book, The Toilet Paper Entrepreneur. Forget the author, but he did a good book. It's a fun book.
I think I read that one.
And he talked about how money amplifies everything.
Oh, yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
if you
Yeah.
have bad habits, bad thoughts, bad proclivities, and good ones, it's going to amplify it all.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it can sure tip that scale and ruin your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Jim Rohn said money just amplifies what you are. That, if you're a nice guy, whenever you get money, you can really be a nice guy. And if you're a jerk, you can really be an asshole.
Right. 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 And, that's just one of the things that excites me, because I've been able to connect with some of my ancestors through some things they have. Like, my mother has the quilt from my great-great-great-grandmother's wedding that all the ladies from the church got together and sewed for her, and she was a Quaker, and have a portrait of her, from the mid to late 1800s. And, I have my grandfather's Russian books and textbooks, and I have a sketch up there that his wife did of him at his desk writing, most likely doing equations. And I'm there at my desk, and I can look upright and see him doing the same exact thing. And to have that connection and being able to read the letters he would write when he was deployed, and recognize that I use a lot of the same prose and syntax, the way I structure the sentence and the way I would write, kind of the cadence, and that probably came through my mother as well, through him. And it's just really interesting to experience more of a connection. It makes it more real, more emotionally real, this belief of being one with everything. And and I would hope that maybe somewhere along the line, one out of my progeny will find this and have the same reaction that I would have.
Right.
And that really excites me when I write. And that's one of the big pleasures I get from writing, is out picturing that and lending weight to what I write of, this had better be important and worthwhile.
Right.
And there was Jim Rohn who said, a life worth living is a life worth recording.
Right.
And it's
it's
fun.
one of the ideas that I came across, and I don't remember where it was. It was out of a book someplace, and it might have been from Tony Robbins, doing the rocking chair test. Where you close your eyes and you imagine yourself sitting on your front porch in a rocking chair whenever you're 105 years old, and you have all your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren around you celebrating your birthday, and you get to tell them the story about the amazing life that you led.
Right.
And then from that point, you can recognize things that are really important to you, and you need to get on not doing them, not forcing them into the physical realm, but creating them the way you want them, and then have them manifested naturally into the realm. And they will always be on time.
Right. And again, it's that whole living from the end. And, some might say that's putting the cart before the horse, but no, you're not getting out of order. What you're doing is you're visualizing the ideal outcome of what you actually want, and then you work your way back from there. And it's been an interesting experience going skiing this season for the first time. And my second day this past week, I finally had a huge breakthrough that has prevented me from biffing it skiing. And one of the things that my instructor, my good friend, had me do was look down the run. He said, because if you get going too fast and you need to slow down or even come to a stop, use the terrain. So if you're going down this run, which way do you turn to slow down? And I said, left. He goes, right, because that's going uphill. Because if you're going uphill on skis, you will slow down.
Right.
I said, okay, that sounds believable.
Right.
That makes sense. If you're going uphill on skis, at some point you will stop.
Do I really look that stupid?
Right.
Well, don't answer that.
Right. Right. And it was, and we looked down the run, and the end of the run is the goal. Okay, now let's get there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like dancing. Looking down at one's feet and where they're being placed is the best way to step on someone's toes.
Right.
And that's been one thing that I've known since I was a kid, but the way Neville Goddard would talk about it and express it, it just made all the sense in the world, and it was so much more clear. And it felt more in harmony. I felt more in harmony with it than some of the usual manifestation visualizing techniques that get talked about. And that thinking from the end and experiencing it and knowing, like what you and I talked about over breakfast today, was be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am, which means in full faith, in full knowing, being able to be quiet and not move, not being reactive, not having to take action, being still and know that I am. And then once you see where you do have to move, it's, even athletes and fighters and soldiers have talked about it, where you still yourself, you still your mind, and then you don't move until you have to.
Right.
Because odds are you'll move directly into where you don't want to go, because that's where you're focused.
Right.
And it's a bit like going down on the freeway when I would be on my motorcycle and I can't check my GPS. I know, okay, at some point there will be a sign to turn off, and until then I just enjoy the ride.
Right.
And then once I see a sign for Aspen, there we go.
Yep.
And for me, that's been one of the things I've been really internalizing from reading Neville Goddard.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep.
Cool, man. Well, thank you. I think that was a great introduction, and I look forward to our future conversations on this subject.
Yeah, and for those of you in our audience, if you'd like and subscribe, we'd appreciate it.
Yes, we would. Very much so. Awesome, Cliff. Thanks so much, man.
Okay, you're
We'll
welcome.
Talk soon.